Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hawkcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I am your recruiting analyst and host of this podcast, Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby and managing editor Ross Binder on this beautiful Sunday morning in November. And I think we can credit the warmth today to the heat that the Iowa offense brought. Yes, I am cringing with you at that sentence that I just said. But
Eliot, I just want to make sure none of us woke up and got fired by Texas A&M this morning, right?
Not any of us. Somebody else did, luckily.
All right. That's
good. If you missed that, more recent breaking news. Jimbo Fisher is expected to be fired today. It hasn't come forth.
I think it's done. It's just maybe not official, but it's happening.
Okay.
Yeah. He's been fired in the press at the very least.
Right. Well, he's been fired in the press for probably a little while now. But lots of money left on the table that I'm sure some booster is going to come forth and help the program out with, because that's a lot of dough. So this is an Iowa football podcast, so let's get to the game last night. We actually saw what we've been hearing about in complementary football last night. That was the first time all season I've seen something remotely close to complementary football, unless you count the Western Michigan game, I guess, which was kind of ugly, but no. Ross says no, therefore that is a no. Deacon Hill.
I just don't count that game because it was Western Michigan. Like, they're just not a very good football team. Like, Rutgers is a legitimately good football team, and we actually saw a very competent offense yesterday. So
very competent is definitely relative in Iowa circles. But 20 of 31 for Deacon Hill, 223 yards. That's the first time an Iowa quarterback has surpassed 200 yards in 12 games. One touchdown, of course, the interception, that was a little bit silly, but you give him a break on that one because of how he played overall. 65% of his passes completed. Did not think we'd see him get anywhere near that this season. And he does against a solid Rutgers defense. The Hawkeyes take the victory 22-0. Adam, I'm going to hit you. You just published an article on the site this morning about Deacon Hill and his performance. So you went a little bit more in depth than what we did. What'd you think of Hill, and did you garner anything in particular about the performance in writing the article that maybe some of us didn't see?
Well, there was a couple things that stood out to me about his performance that I would say sort of flew under the radar. And the first of them was the fact that Deacon Hill, technically, that there is a caveat here, but technically Deacon Hill did not get sacked on Saturday. And when we're talking about the negative plays that can really derail an Iowa drive, aside from a turnover, the next worst thing that can happen is a loss of down and a loss of, 8 to 10 to 12 yards. And we've seen plenty of those plays from Deacon Hill over his first 4 weeks. And for all of the ball control faults that he's had, the bad interceptions, and there was one on Saturday, the fumbles, whether or not they get lost or not, the sack is the bronze medalist of disasters as Iowa offenses go. And so the fact that Hill was able to not only avoid the sacks, but also navigate the pocket with some surprising poise, I would say, really reflected a step forward in his development as a quarterback. Now, the one caveat is he was sacked, and I think you guys, I saw both of your ears sort of perk up, because he was sacked the one time, but it got negated by defensive holding call. And I didn't even see the hold, but no one really seemed to be complaining on the Rutgers sideline that much. But that was it. Other than that, navigated the pocket cleanly, just had the one really bad interception that he threw. But since he wasn't sacked, there wasn't really an opportunity for him to put the ball on the ground. There was the one botched handoff in the second half, I believe. But again, like, these are the exceptions that prove the rule. And the fact that Deacon has just brought that baseline of competency and like eliminating the disasters, the fact that he's just brought that up is in and of itself, it's not the sexy sort of improvement that fans want to see, but it is a big part of the reason why he eclipsed 200 yards. And Eliot, I'll go one further on you. Not only the first 200-yard passing performance by the Hawkeyes this season, not only the first in 358 games, I want to say, but at 223, it was the highest passing total since week 5 of last season, when Petrus had to throw a bunch in the fourth quarter to try to make up the deficit against Michigan in that really forgettable home game last season. That was it. And so the fact that it's Deacon Hill and not Cade McNamara breaking that streak and doing it with room to spare, boy, it says a whole lot about his progression in just the last 4 weeks. And Kirk Ferentz sort of said the same thing after the game. Ross, you saw something else too, didn't you?
Well, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on your thought about, he had those mistakes. He had the interception, was kind of a botched snap fumble towards the end of the game. And I think what really stood out to me was that those plays don't hurt as much when he's also making a lot of other good plays. Like, what we've had the issue with for the last month or 6 weeks with him is that the good plays are so few and far between with him in the passing game. And so then when those negative plays happen, they can just be really crippling, especially like that interception right before halftime. That was a surefire scoring opportunity. They're on the 3-yard line, 5-yard line. At the absolute worst, they should be getting a field goal there, go into halftime up 6-0. The last couple of games, if Iowa doesn't get points there, that could have been, crippling, the way we've seen the offense operate against Minnesota and Northwestern and even Wisconsin to a little bit of an extent. But there were just so many more opportunities in this game. The offense was able to be successful. Hill was successful. He was completing passes. In your article, you noted that Iowa didn't have a 3rd and out or a 3 and out in the entire game, which is a tremendous stat for this offense in particular, because they've been just the kings of the 3 and out this season. I'll get to you in just a minute, Adam, but I was just going to say, and that was Deacon. A lot of it was, he had a couple sneaks to get first downs. He was throwing some good passes on to get first downs too. So, like, there was just real progress in his performance, which was super encouraging.
Speaking of sneaks, Deacon likes sneaking Deacon. He said he's heard it so much more in his life in the last 2 weeks than he has ever, but he has approved it. He did last night.
One thing that I'll point out about that sneak, and that was one of the 4 instances where not only did Iowa avoid a 3 and out on a drive, but Deacon personally converted that 3rd down. He had 3 passes to convert a 3rd down on that first series of the drive, and a sneak on 3rd and 1 that ended up giving them 2 yards. So again, Ross, not only did this team avoid the 3 and outs, but Deacon was the one making those plays and sustaining the drives. And that's how drives turn into points, is just to like get that journey started. And so the fact that Hill had gone from I believe it was 24 3 and outs, and we're not even including the turnovers, 24 like 3 play and then punt drives over the last 4 weeks, turns around and as close to a clean slate as you're probably going to get out of a player like him. Again, 2 bad mistakes, and no one in that locker room is running from either of them. But again, they're sort of the exceptions that prove the rule, that everything other than that, maybe not everything, but so much other than that was positive, that just like Ross said, you can withstand those mistakes and still win by, like Iowa did, by 22. And that is what fans have been waiting for basically all season long.
I think with this defense is so good that you don't have to give them a lot on offense, obviously, for Iowa to have a chance to win a game. But they need something. And they were just getting so little to work with these last few games. And, that's what, that bit them against Minnesota. It's been close in some other games too. You give them as many opportunities as they had yesterday, and that's how you get, it was only 22-0, and that felt like a 45-0 win for most teams, I think. Like, yeah, it was just
once you incorporate the Big Ten West exchange rate, it was basically a 45-0 anywhere else.
Now, I just tweeted this out. This is from last night's game. We're talking about the offense and the defense, especially Deacon Hill contributing the way he did last night. Obviously, I read his stats: 20 of 31, 223 yards and a touchdown. 46 carries between Jazz Patterson, Le'Shawn Williams, Kaleb Johnson, 2 end arounds for Kaleb Brown, and then they incorporated those losses for yards as well. Caden Weegan in there. 46 carries, 179 yards and a touchdown, 402 total yards. That's the first time they've eclipsed 400 yards this season, and I don't know the last time they did it. Iowa defense, they held the Wimsatt to 7 of 18 for 93 yards and an interception. 23 carries. This is team total for Rutgers. 23 carries, 34 yards. That's against the team with Monangai, who I believe was leading the Big Ten in rushing, 903 yards going into this game. He did it against Ohio State. He did it against, I believe, either Michigan or Penn State. I don't know if they've played. I think Michigan. Didn't do it against Iowa. Held him to 127 yards, which is the fewest they've allowed since 2019 against, you guessed it, Rutgers. That is complimentary football. We've been hearing all about it all season. We finally saw it. And I would appreciate a retweet because I'm happy about that. I'm happy about putting all of that together and getting it out on Twitter. And that really came together last night. And, speaking of which, here's a stat for you. For those who haven't seen it again on my Twitter, I said it to Adam at the game last night. Kaleb Brown's touchdown. We'll of course, talk about Kaleb Brown here momentarily. His touchdown was the first to a wide receiver since they played, you guessed it, Western Michigan in week 3. Deontay Vines caught a touchdown pass in that one. Kaleb Brown caught the first for a wide receiver since week 3. All it took was 9 games and 3/4 of a game, something like that. So here we are. And now, with a bit of a rough stat, we can transition to something a little bit better in Kaleb Brown. We actually got to see him. And his stat line wasn't exactly ridiculous last night, but just to see him be productive, for them to put the ball in his hands and him contribute to the offense is so big. It's so big for him and for the offense to see him contribute. 1, it's confidence for him. 2, it's trust, not only from the players, his teammates, but from the staff to say, oh, he actually put it together in a college football game. This isn't something where he's coming in and we're just talking about the potential every week. This is something where we've actually seen it. And I'll read you his stats here momentarily. He had 2 rushes for 20 yards, which in the Iowa offense is fantastic for a receiver. He also caught 3 passes for 27 yards and a touchdown. And it's not like he was wide open on that touchdown. It's not like he had a ton of green grass in front of him on those runs. He was taking contact. He was making guys miss. And this is the Kaleb Brown, again, 4-star receiver, all the potential in the world, something that we've talked about all season. They ran a receiver screen for him, which is something I've been talking about for 9 games. And he did it. And this is monumental for the Iowa offense. What Deacon Hill did is that step further. But what Kaleb Brown did last night is huge. And obviously, you want Deontay Vines back. You want him on the field. But in his absence, Kaleb Brown was great.
Yeah, it really felt like not only Deacon, who we've talked about plenty now, but also Kaleb, like you mentioned, it really sort of felt like they were making footholds in terms of the progress that they're trying to make as Hawkeyes here in their first season with the program. And it's one thing to hear about it in practice, right? it's another to see it happen on the field, especially when for so much of the season, Kaleb's been on the bench or potentially in the doghouse on a personal matter. Deacon has, been the as much of a focal point for derision and punchlines as, frankly, his offensive coordinator's been. And like you said, Saturday felt like the first time where they're really not only just like putting it together enough to get on the field, but to succeed on the field. And that is very validating, especially for a younger player. And they're both very young. And Kirk has told us that many times about both of them. And he says that for a reason, because they really do need to get their consistency up in order to be able to be productive against Big Ten defenses. That's just, we see what happens when the consistency isn't there. And that's usually disaster plays. So to see Kaleb go from not even on the field, not even in uniform, and everybody sort of whispering about what it means for him, to get onto the field, to make plays. Eliot, like you mentioned, he scored that touchdown, and it's not like he just caught the ball and was standing in the end zone. It was a 3rd and 10, and he had multiple tackles to break to get into the end zone, and he did it. And some of that is also why he is so intriguing as a prospect. And that's because he played running back in high school, which again, Kirk will be quick to remind us about. And that while it has sort of underscored the fact that he's got a lot of room to grow as a receiver, the fact that he's got those between the tackle running skills, we'll put it that way, is why he was able to score on that play. It's why he was able to fight for those extra 4 or 5 yards against Northwestern in that big crucial catch that he had that, essentially put Iowa in field goal range and meant that, they didn't have to lean on Deacon one too many times potentially. So the fact that he's already flashing why he was brought into Iowa City in the first place, even if, there's a lot of building that he needs to do, at the very least, he can see, the fans can see, the coaches can see why he's there, and it's already turning into production. It's, patience is a luxury that fans really don't want and that coaches often don't have. But with just a little bit of patience, by 2024, assuming everything else, stays on track for him, Kaleb Brown looks like, he was brought in for a reason, and he can start to be, getting closer to stardom at the very least. So yeah, that's incredibly encouraging. And Iowa needs that sort of playmaking on the outside as bad as anything on this team, as bad as anything.
I tell you what, when you look at the performance from Deacon Hill last night, 20 of 31, like we talked about, that's got to do so much for his confidence, right? Like we could, Adam, I don't know about you, but I could feel it when he was at the post-game presser last night. That was a different Deacon that we saw. That was a different Deacon. And to know that you've got a playmaker that's not your running back in Le'Shawn Williams or Caleb Johnson or Jazz Patterson, it's not your tight end. You don't have to default to Eric All like he was those first few games with him as the starter, obviously all out for the season. Now his tight end number 1 is Addison Ostrenga. And we got to talk about that catch to Zach Ortworth as well, or that throw to Zach Ortworth. But to know you have a playmaker on the perimeter and a guy you just have to get the ball to and he can make a play, that is enormous. You don't have, this is no disrespect to Nico Ragaini, no disrespect to Deontay Vines. That's not who they are. I'd probably trust Seth Anderson to make more of a play in that moment. And he's not exactly a playmaker in those moments either, but you have that in Kaleb Brown. And that just adds a whole different dynamic to the offense. And it's got to be something in the back of Deacon's mind where it's, I can hand it off to one of these three guys. They can make a play. I can get the ball to our tight end, which is something that we traditionally do in this offense. The offensive line, despite all the injuries, looked pretty damn good yesterday. Tyler Ellsbury at center. We ended up seeing Jack Dotzler at left guard later on in the game. I'm sure that the game was in hand, so they just wanted to get Rusty out. But you've got a playmaker on the exterior now, on the exterior of the offense. You get it to him in space, Kaleb Brown can make a play. He did it on that 3rd and goal, 3rd and 10 last night. That's just another thing. That's another notch in your belt as the backup quarterback who's had to come in and the offense relies on you.
Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of Brown, that I thought it was encouraging that they just put him in positions to succeed like they did. Using him on those end arounds, and then using him as the wide receiver screen pass. Those are things where he can be very effective. And, they finally used him in those roles, and it worked well for the offense. So that was, I think, gratifying, and hopefully something to build on for the next couple games.
The one thing that I'll point out, the guard that we saw, I had to look it up afterwards, Eliot. It was actually Cade Piper, the freshman. Yeah. Which in and of itself. But yeah, I thought it was Dotzler too until I saw his nameplate when we were on the field at the end. But yeah, he was in there, which is correct, because he's a freshman. So that portends well. But he was actually a guy that we had asked Jennings Dunker about on Tuesday, because he had shown up in the 2 deeps, and he's listed at 255 pounds. And the last time that we've seen an Iowa lineman listed that low and actually getting on the field was either Bruce Nelson or Robert Gallery in 2000. Back when they were still trying to put weight on. Dunker did tell us that Piper is up to 285 already. So he wasn't really overmatched physically, despite what it'll look like on paper at the very least. But yeah, that was, I thought that was fascinating that he had already sort of worked his way into that rotation, and something to look forward to in 24, because there are some guys that are going to be exiting the offensive line between now and then. That all said, I was also really struck by the fact that actually, let's cut that part, because I've absolutely lost my train of thought. So
so I can take it from there. In regards to Piper, when we were talking with Jennings, about his diet. Jennings is known for his, what is it, 8 protein shakes a day. He's down to 2 now, I think.
Yeah.
And we asked him about Cade and how he put on all that weight, if he took any advice from Jennings, and Jennings mostly carbs. That was so funny. He went from 255 to 285 in the time, or 250, somewhere around then, to 285 now. In such a short amount of time being with the program. This is a guy we've heard a lot about, and we can't forget Leighton Jones is in there. Trevor Lauk is in there. And this is a group that we've heard a lot about from Coach Barnett in the serving in that practice squad group. Trevor Lauk is a 4-star out of Indianapolis. And so these are guys, these are George Barnett's guys. We're starting to see this offensive line start to come together finally towards the end of the season here, and now Barnett's guys are starting to get incorporated into what they're doing. And it's patience is a luxury that fans don't want to use. You said it, Adam. And now it's starting to look like that might be on its way back to really being an anchor for the Iowa offense, is that offensive line. And again, this is 1 week as compared to, several other weeks we've seen throughout the season where the offensive line looked bad. So we don't want to get, too far ahead of ourselves here, but it has looked improved. There's a lot of young guys coming in. I think Joey Van Wetsinga in the 2025 class is going to be an awesome center. And I skipped over 2024. Cody Fox is coming in as a 4-star offensive lineman. I believe in Bodie McCaslin. I believe in Will Nolan. I really like that that offensive line group in 2024 as well. And I know I'm forgetting. Josh Janowski out of Lincoln Way East in Chicago. So things are trending in the right direction for the offensive line. Now that we've talked about the offense, by the way, no, we got to talk about Zach Ortworth because Steve Stylianos was out yesterday too. This is the top, or 3 of the top 4 tight ends out. Obviously, that happened against Wisconsin too, with Eric All going down with a knee injury, and that's when Addison Ostrenga was dealing with some health stuff. Zach Ortworth catches his first ball of his career at Iowa, 54 yards. Deacon was telling us about it post game, and he was like, I could see from that far away his eyes get about this big. Caught that ball. And that's another guy that I tweeted about it last night. I believe I asked Steve Stylianos about Ortworth earlier on in the season when all the injuries were going on with the tight end group. And he said, yeah, he's going to be good. You can see it now. And like Piper, we've seen a little bit more of Ortworth, and we've seen some of the issues just because he is a true freshman with that blocking that he was tasked with against Wisconsin. But he snuck up the seam and was wide open. And if Deacon hit him in stride, that's a touchdown.
Yeah, that there was. It was funny because not only did Deacon make that comment in the post game, but as soon as Deacon said, I had a pretty good view of his eyes, like that was all it took for that newsroom to just start laughing because we knew what was coming. And yeah, you have to imagine for a guy who's never made a catch at the college level, just breaking on a seam route and just like looking in front of himself and saying, oh, no one's covering me. And then you turn around and the ball is coming. Like, yeah, my eyes would be as big as saucers at that point. And the fact that he was able to, at the very least, trust his instincts enough and, black out, as Deacon put it, to just trust his instincts, trust his skill set, make that catch and get as many yards as possible is a testament to the work that the coaches have done to get that lower end of the tight end room healthy. Because Eliot, like you said, the first 3 tight ends on that depth chart all gone. And this is an offense that really, really needs tight end. And so, all you're left with at the point of last week was, Addison Ostrenga, Zach Ortworth, Johnny Pescuzzi is in that mix too. Like that's about it. And that's not really what this offense was set up for when they started the season. And so it's another instance of it's a testament to the coaches for getting that many guys ready for like important snaps during the season, right? We're not talking about garbage time at this point. Like Iowa really needed those 54 yards from Ortworth. Deacon Hill really needed them. So it's a testament to the coaches. It's a testament to the players, and really just sort of a testament to, I don't want to necessarily call it complimentary football, but a testament to the fact that Iowa's success at other positions and other phases of the game sort of allows them to learn on the fly, to just sort of learn on the field, baptism by fire, whatever cliche you want. And that is something that bad teams don't really do, or, just sort of take L's in the process. And Iowa's got these guys who were nowhere near the depth chart at the start of the season. They're contributing to a winning team. This team's already locked up a share of the division championship. They're a near lock to play in Indianapolis. And that seems so unlikely. And some of it's a bad division, but also some of it is just someone has to win, and Iowa keeps doing it.
I would be pretty surprised if a week from go ahead, Ross.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, shout out to Ostrenga too, because he had 8 catches yesterday. He was a big part of that, keeping the offense going. He had some definite, first down catches on some third down throws from Deacon, and he had a really great catch towards the sideline, I think, near the end of the game. And just seeing some more consistency from him, was just another good sign because they are just so, lacking in the tight end room right now, just in terms of bodies. So having guys that can step up and produce is huge.
I thought you were being hyperbolic. He actually had 8 catches. 8 catches for 47 yards. 8 catches, 8 targets.
Yep.
Yeah.
47 yards. Yep. Well, while we're on it, who led the receiving group in yards yesterday?
It was Ortworth, right?
Ross, is that your guess?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was Ortworth for total yards. Yeah.
Yep. 1 catch, 54 yards. Next up was Nico with 4 catches for 48 yards. He was targeted 11 times and only had 4 catches. So I'd have to go back and look at what that looked like. But to have your tight end, your number 1 tight end, have 8 targets, 8 catches, and even though it's for 47 yards, there was one on that rollout, and that is what they're doing with Deacon now. It's a consistent get him on the move, get him out of the pocket, and get him comfortable so he can set and throw. And that's something that has done a lot for him as well. And that's something that we all noticed in his first not start, but first snaps, meaningful snaps against Michigan State.
Yeah, and I think that that's not a coincidence. The fact that they are building this offense off of that rollout and off of that play action, because one of the things that it does is completely change what the passing lanes are that Hill has to work with. And it also clears out a lot of that traffic that's going to be in front of him that can sort of mask coverages. It can mask, where a defender is sitting and waiting and trying to bait him. And we've seen him struggle with trying to throw from the pocket and struggle less away from the pocket. He's still got a lot of work to do. And if you go back and watch, the footwork on some of these rollouts is curious. It could be quieted down just a little bit, and coaches are going to work with that, whoever gets brought in to work with the quarterbacks next year, right? Like, it's a pretty obvious area of improvement for Hill, but you can also have confidence that Hill is going to recognize that it is an area for improvement, because one of the big things that he's mentioned after the game, and especially after Saturday's game, was tuning out everything except for like trusting what his coaches are telling him and have been telling him. He mentioned that last week was the first time he was able to like get into a rhythm, to get into that like competitive blackout area and just like work off of his base. And that tells me that he's coachable. That tells me that he is, not taking a cynical approach to the coaching that they're trying to do with him. That they've done so far. Kirk even mentioned that a lot of those plays that we've talked about here in terms of that rollout package, they just weren't able to do 4 weeks ago. So that is a testament to the growth that he's been able to make on the field. Again, there are going to be fans who say, that wasn't fast enough for them. And we heard that from Deacon last week after, last week's game. And at that point, it was fair, because he had thrown for 330 yards in 4 games at that point. Like, that's dismal. But it's one thing for him to say, I get that we're not growing fast enough. Then he tacks a fast week of growth onto that. And that tells me that things are starting to click, and the Legos are starting to like fall into place, and you can really build off of that and build something sustainable off that. I'm not going to sit here and say, 300 yards against Illinois next week. I'm not going to predict that, but it really does look like things are starting to slow down for Deacon already, and he is in position to succeed. He said Brian called a great game last week, and I kind of have to agree. And we give the Ferentzes a lot of grief, and rightfully so, about sort of antiquated offensive strategies and this and that. But the formula worked on Saturday, even down to like running to set up the pass. Everybody rolls their eyes at that phrase, and half the time it's for good reason because it comes from the 20th century. But all you have to do is look at the plays from Saturday's game. That first drive, it was all runs. It was Le'Shawn Williams moving the chains by himself. And so when they first put the ball into Deacon's hands, he wasn't throwing great passes. And everybody in that stadium was like, well, here we go again. But the fact that Le'Shawn Williams was able to sort of draw those defenders into those run gaps as soon as Iowa showed that action meant that rollout and play action was going to be there for them every single time. And that's how you get things like Addy Ostrenga goes, 8 for 8 on targets. It's because he was always open, and Iowa did not do too much in order to get him the ball. The most challenging throw of those 8, and I think by a pretty wide margin, was one it was in the second half, and it was one where Hill steps up in the pocket with pressure. He's locked onto Ostrenga, who's actually in the middle of the field on this one, and still zips it in between 2 defenders.
Yeah. That was a crazy throw.
In one of the rare instances where his 95-mile-an-hour fastball was the exact one that he needed to throw. And he did it, and Ostrenga made that play, which, again, is a testament to the work that he's done to get himself ready for that. Gosh, if Ostrenga weren't well coached, that would have bounced off his hands 10 times out of 10. Or he, wouldn't have been able to shoulder guys out to make space for himself, right? That was a pretty remarkable play that we would not have seen. Kirk said 4 weeks ago. I don't know if we would have seen it. Well, 2 weeks ago was the bye. I don't know if we would have seen it 2 games ago or even last weekend against Northwestern. That was a progression of a quarterback skill set right in front of us. So yeah, there is so much to build off of, and so many teaching moments as well. Eliot, you mentioned 4 for 11 to Reggini, and the interception wasn't even one of them. That was to Seth Anderson, and it was such a poor route that I don't think it was designed to go to him. Regardless, some of those were misses to Reggini, and some of them were just there was a fade route to the end zone. I think it was in the first half that just went over Raggini's head, and I think some different receivers on Iowa would have turned that into a touchdown. And I'm not saying that to bash Raggini or anything like that, but some of it was a reminder that's not all of these incompletions are on Deacon. Some of them, Iowa has cleaned up the drops, thankfully, because we've seen some really, really ugly performances on that front, and Saturday was not one of them. But Iowa's receivers are not always doing Deacon any favors. And there were a couple of throws to Raggini that I thought sort of fell into that. And there were some that just weren't catchable for him either, and would have been catchable for any other receiver. So, places to clean things up still. And coaches will tell us that. And I'm, basically said that on Saturday, will tell us that on Tuesday and Wednesday too, depending on who we get. But this was sort of the foundation that you get to build off of from there. So yeah, it's got to be an instance, and I finally figured out where my train had gone off the tracks, Eliot. But if Deacon had said all of those things about his confidence growing and trusting his teammates and coaches and all that, if he had said all that last week or after the Minnesota game, we wouldn't have been sitting there thinking, oh yeah, I could see that, and been like, buddy, tell a better lie, right?
Right.
Tell something plausible. But I believed it after Saturday's game. And some of that was just sort of the glow of having beaten a team by 22, but some of it was also the fact that, yeah, it was earned confidence. It was I think he's actually starting to believe it. And just like he said, this was the first week where you could really say that.
Right. And to revert back to a couple things that you mentioned, Adam, I think last night was the first time I would catch myself looking at what was going on in the field and saying, oh, I don't know if this is a pass or a run, because they were setting it up with a run, the play action with a run. Like, oh, it's a play action. So us lowly media folks don't know what's going to happen. Maybe that means opposing teams are looking at their tendencies and saying, oh, this isn't what we expected. And therefore, you get that complimentary football result. You get that 22-0 because you open up things and you, I guess you actually do open up things, and you find where teams are expecting you to do one thing and you do another, and that means you score points. Like, it's simple but not easy, right? Like,
yeah.
that is what we saw last night. I think that was the first time we saw that this season. So to end our 40-minute rant about the offense, we still gotta talk about the defense, right? I mean, like, to pitch a shutout, they have just continually gotten better throughout the whole season. Jay Higgins finishes with 8 tackles. They put together 3 tackles for a loss, 1 sack. That sack was by Nick Jackson, who is the epitome of what this defense has done. Like, if you were to put it down to one player on this defense and say that encapsulates what the entire defense has done this season, it's Nick Jackson. Was kind of figuring things out at the beginning of the year, really finding where he was supposed to be, playing a lot of coverage, and now they've let him loose, and the defense is back to, if not close to, its elite status that it was at last season. I mean, I wouldn't put it quite to where it was at last year at this point in time, but it's pretty damn good. It's among the best in the country right now.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that Nick Jackson adds to this defense, especially now that he is growing into his role and has so many games under his belt, is just another level of versatility. And they weren't really hurting for that versatility to begin with. But now, opposing quarterbacks have to figure out, all right, is Sebastian Castro coming on a blitz or is he in coverage? Is Nick Jackson coming on a blitz or is he in coverage? Where's Jay Higgins going to be? Because there's a pretty good chance that he's going to be the guy ending up making the tackle, right? There's so many different moving parts that are going to be in front of a quarterback. And when those moving parts are as talented as a, Xavier Wampa, as a Cooper DeJean, as a Jay Higgins, to say nothing of the guys on the defensive line, like, that is so difficult to prepare for, especially when you've got a brain like Phil Parker disguising coverages, mixing up looks, playing off of tendencies, and trying to bait quarterbacks into bad decisions. I mean, gosh, how many times do we see Iowa making an interception and the defenders just basically waiting there for the ball? Quinn Schulte making the pick against Rutgers on Saturday was a perfect example. It was a bad throw, to be sure, but he was right there in position for it. And so often we see that Sebastian Castro's pick 6 against Iowa State, it was a great play to break for that. But that wasn't just reaction, it was instinct. And that instinct comes from coaching. And it also comes from understanding your position, understanding the leverage, understanding what the quarterback's going to do, as well as the quarterback understands it, right? Like, being in his head is how Castro makes that jump as soon as the quarterback, lines up to make that throw. So the fact that Nick Jackson gets thrown into that mix in terms of how is he going to make a play on this play, right? Is he going to make a play on pass rush? Is it going to be in coverage? Who's he lined up on? And you can't really count on any one answer. That's really, really difficult for offensive coordinators, and just really underscores all the different ways that Iowa can put pressure on defenses. And Phil had a lot of fun on Saturday, especially on the 3rd and longs. And Jay sort of hinted at it a few weeks ago when he mentioned field position. And, when a team is backed up inside its 10, that's when Phil really likes to dial up the blitzes and get super aggressive. Well, when it's also 3rd and long, Phil gets super aggressive too. And we saw that on Saturday. And, Rutgers, Wimsatt has been productive this year, he had no chance on Saturday. Couldn't run it, couldn't throw it, couldn't really depend on Monangai to, move the chains in his stead either. Like the Rutgers offense just could not do a thing against the Iowa defense. And it made Deacon's job a little bit easier, but it also really underscored the fact that, look, if you don't have your stuff together going up against the Iowa defense, it is going to be pain for 60 minutes. Pain. And that's what Iowa delivered.
Ross, you put together the overall article. Obviously, Adam and I got to the offense. Adam, Deacon, myself, Kaleb, Ross. I want to hear your thoughts on the defensive performance last night.
Yeah, excuse me. I think the thing that stood out to me about the defense really was just the way it improved over the course of the game. I mean, and it wasn't bad to start at all, but they gave up 70 some yards, I think, in the first quarter. And then the next three quarters, it was just like a boa constrictor, like squeezing around some poor, helpless bunny rabbit, basically. Like Rutgers just couldn't do anything. Like tried to run the ball, nope, nothing there. Tried to throw the ball, nope, nothing there. It was just, the defense was. It was one of those games where it's like the defense has like they have 13 guys. Like, is that what's happening? Like, do they have more guys on the field than the offense? And they don't, obviously, but like they know where the offense wants to be, and they're just preventing them from getting to those spots. There were just some great tackles in that game. Higgins had another. I mean, every week I think Higgins has a great, tackle where he just really shows off, just great instincts and just great ability to, get a guy down on the ground. And so that just really just struck me that this defense, and it was one of those things where you try to single out one guy, and it's almost impossible because it's the entire unit just working as one. It's the D line doing their job. It's the linebackers. Higgins and Jackson are probably the flashiest, just kind of because of the nature of the roles they play. Like everything gets funneled to them, so they get to make the tackles. They get to make the big plays. But the secondary, they're smothering coverage, and just the whole thing is working together so smoothly and so perfectly that's it's a chain with no weak links. It's just it's all clicking. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing to watch. Like the defense is just completely, just destroying an opponent like that is really impressive.
Yeah,
One thing,
it's a beautiful thing to watch if you enjoy watching like the vivisection of farm animals, right? Like, but to go back to your comparison to like a boa constrictor, I've been thinking that all year, and part of that is because of the stat. Like coming into the season, Iowa was 63-2, either 62-2 or 63-2 in games where they had at any point an 8-point lead. And the first time that we heard it was in the Iowa State game, second game of the year. And yeah, at that point it was already 63. And everyone's like, what kind of stat? Like that stat can't be real, because like usually there's so many qualifiers attached to it, like 8-point lead in the fourth quarter, or like when they have 200 yards rushing. No qualifiers, just at any point in the game, an 8-point lead, which again, one possession. And now you look at this team, and one, haven't blown any 8-point leads this year. Two, have had that lead in 7 of their 8 wins and won them all. And the one that where they didn't was that defensive battle against Northwestern at Wrigley Field, which was as great a performance by the defense as, well, I mean, anything up to last week, really. Like at that point in the season, it was probably the defense's best performance. So that is a testament to coaching as well. It's a testament to Phil Parker, and really just that nature of, all right, we've done enough to win. Now it's time to choke these jokers out. And Iowa just does such an incredible job of it. And in a sport where you just would not you would expect more variance than 70-2, especially over such a long, like that's 2 recruiting cycles, no less, right? Like you can't be like, and that's all thanks to Cooper DeJean, or, that is entirely different personnel cycles. And Iowa just keeps winning when it's in position. And I don't know how you can attribute that to anything other than Kirk Ferentz coaching. I really don't. That is execution of game plans that any other coach in America would kill for. And I'm only mildly exaggerating, because I think about 30 to 40% of FBS head coaches would actually kill for, as long as they didn't get caught. They wouldn't want to go to prison, but they would, you see these guys and you get it. But yeah, that was it's as much a part of Kirk Ferentz's legacy at Iowa as anything. It's just his ability to find ways to win games and make it happen. It's incredible.
Well, I think you guys made every point to possibly make about the defense. One last thing that I'll say before we get out of here, and Adam heads to Cedar Falls for Iowa's matchup with UNI this afternoon. Caitlin Clark looking to become the all-time leading scorer at Iowa, correct? 16 points away?
Yep.
Yeah, so she's probably going to get that. Spoiler alert. The last thing I'll say about the Iowa defense is that pick from Quinn Schulte last night. The way Jay and Nick raved about Quinn after the game. I believe Kirk did as well. And then you look at video that was put up by Mitch Fick from KGAN. It's on Twitter. Mitch does great work.
Yes.
He got a shot of Quinn and the rest of the defense. Well, he got the shot of Quinn getting the interception, but them running off the field and celebrating. Cooper DeJean does not bat an eye when he makes an unreal play. Everybody else loses their mind. Cooper DeJean does not bat an eye. Quinn gets that pick, and you will never see Cooper celebrate like that. Yeah, he was biggest smile I've almost ever seen on his face, all over Quinn after that pick. And quote, I think it was from Nick, said it last night. He's like, once I saw Quinn, I turned around and tried to ran as fast as I could, tried to block the best I could, didn't hit anybody. But I think Jay referenced the media too and just said something like, oh, you guys never cover Quinn. It's like, well, he's not that exciting of a personality. Neither is the free safety position. It's there. He does his job. He's like a secondary Mike linebacker out there is essentially what they told us last night. Putting guys where they need to be and makes plays. Often doesn't come up with interceptions. You don't have him be aggressive. You have him be at the back of the defense as, center field, well, not necessarily center field, but that last line of defense makes those tackles, prevents big plays. And he got that pick last night, and the rest of the defense couldn't have been happier. He almost returned it for 6. Imagine what they would have been like if he returned that for a touchdown.
I was on that play. They were blocking like crazy to try to get him into the end zone on that run back. Like everyone wanted him to get that touchdown.
They did.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised to hear that the workload for free safety in this Iowa defense is as high, if not higher, than the Mike backers, because we hear about all of the things that get put on the shoulders of Mikes in this defense, and we've been hearing it for years and years and years, right? Like that's not like they're not saying that to prop up Jay or Jack. Like that is just what we understand about the Iowa defense. And so the fact that Quinn got that pick and was in great position to do it. And Quinn's always just been that guy that's in that position to make the play. And it sounds basic, but it's another one of those simple, not easy sort of things. And it seems like every big play that you see a defense give up, especially in the passing game, or even like on long runs, it starts with a safety who's out of position. And Schulte's just never out of position. And that has to drive quarterbacks, defensive coordinators, or opposing offensive coordinators, has to drive them insane. That there's just like, that door never gets propped open. by Schulte, by some sort of misstep. And rarely has a free safety in an Iowa defense ever been the guy that does leave it open, but we've seen a few now and then. And you don't have to make those big flashy plays, those interceptions, fumble recoveries, or even, forces and all that to be highly, highly effective in a great defense. And Schulte has been sort of A1 of guys who have proven that. Kayvon Merriweather was the same way, and he even made some of those flashy plays. He made them more often than Schulte does. But you don't have to turn the ball over to be a great safety in a Phil Parker defense. You just have to keep being in position every single time. And again, not easy, but it is simple.
Former quarterbacks and walk-ons, always going to be in that free safety spot. Quinn Schulte, the epitome of them all. And unless you guys have something else to add, we can get out of here and let you head to Cedar Falls, Adam. All good?
Yeah, that sounds great. I've got nothing else. Yeah.
All right, cool. Iowa men play Creighton at 9 p.m. So late game on Tuesday. I'll be covering that as well. You can follow along on Twitter at Eliot Clough. Of course, follow along for today's game at Adam_Jacoby. Adam, where is that game going to be broadcasted?
That one is going to be streaming as well, unfortunately. BTN Plus or Peacock. It's one of the two. Ross, you're shaking your head. Which one is it?
ESPN Plus.
ESPN Plus. Okay, so number 3.
Okay.
Regardless, it's streaming only, which is a little bit of a disappointment to everyone who wants to watch Caitlin Clark on TV. But it seems like, I don't know, it's not difficult to find an ESPN Plus or Disney Plus promotion at this point. So, but yeah, it'll be online, just like me and my Twitter account.
Exactly. So if you're not on ESPN Plus or as any of the Disney bundles, follow along with Adam on Twitter. And having been a UNI graduate and been informed in those involved in those broadcasts, I can say I am not surprised it's on ESPN Plus. That's usually how they do things. But anywho, we will wrap it up here. Stay tuned for all that coverage, and of course, we'll get preview for that Illinois game coming up later this week. I'll be at State Football on Friday to cover both Reese Vanderzee and Derek Weiskopf in that championship game. And then once again, be making the trip back for Arkansas State basketball game for the men against Arkansas State on Friday. Back at it Saturday in Kinnick Stadium. So we got all the coverage for you on iowa.rivals.com. Stay tuned there. And of course, to our Twitter pages as well. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Hotcast, wherever you're listening. If you're on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, please subscribe. That way you do not miss an episode from us. Drop a like for us on YouTube. Drop a rate and review for us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Not only does it make us very happy, it helps us out a lot. So we greatly, greatly appreciate you. Drop your comments, your thoughts on the game from this weekend, for the games going into it this week, what your thoughts are for those games in the comments on YouTube. If we missed anything from today's game, drop us a note. Say, hey, dummies, you missed this. Let us know right there on YouTube. And you do that on our premium board as well. Head over to iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. You can become part of our premium content there. Not only do you get to read our stuff, but you get to interact with us on a daily basis on our premium board. So we appreciate you once again. For now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder. We will see you next time.